Hello everyone, I'm Professor Blink. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. Before we get into today's video, special shout out to my most recent super thankers, JGS1122, Taylor Reed Hudson, Fred Zerez 7875, and Piao Meow Noir in a waifu car. Thank you for your kind support of my channel. You are the logical lily pads to my heretical hypno-toad hopping across the pond of religious propaganda. Thank you very much for helping me to continue to do what I do. And if you like what you see in this video and would like to help out the channel, make sure to subscribe, click the bell so you'll always be notified when new content comes out. And of course, like this video, maybe pop in a comment. All that really does go a long way towards pleasing the objectively wonderful and not at all tyrannical YouTube algorithm and keeping my channel chugging along. Now on to today's video. Today we're going to be taking a look at one Pastor Jonathan Burris, who has some thoughts on atheists, particularly what he describes as the angry or militant atheists that seem to be on the attack against Christianity and religion as a whole. This, of course, feeds into the common Christian narrative of Christian persecution. They seem to think that there's this looming secular boogeyman behind every corner, trying to root out the last lingering vestiges of Christianity from the back alleys and shadowed corners, which are the only places good God-fearing people are still allowed to practice their religion freely anymore. Or perhaps I overstate things, but something similar is often the talking points that you hear.
So hard to follow Christ in the modern day. It's not easy to be a Christian. I'm not going to fool you.
This is why Christianity is the most hated religion in the world. It seems like there's this tolerance for different belief systems, but then when it comes to Christianity, our God is mocked, made fun of, and rejected.
It is hard to be a Christian. It takes a ton of work to be a Christian.
And sure, everyone likes believing that they are the underdogs, that they're the Rocky Balboa struggling valiantly against the bigger, stronger, and intensely arrogant Apollo Creed. But there could not be a more obvious example of getting those roles completely bass-ackwards than the Christian versus atheist dynamic in modern day, especially in the United States. Christians are the supermajority in not only the general populace, but also positions of governmental authority, and where they even have a more pronounced supermajority. When it comes to the struggle between believers and non-believers, the non-believers have always been on the defensive, fighting to keep religion out of the classrooms, out of the job markets, out of the public square, basically just to keep it out of the lives of those who don't want to be beholden to religious doctrine that they don't subscribe to. And for that, we're called Angry Atheists, and accused of attacking good, kindly Christians who never did anything to them to deserve such animosity. And it's those same angry atheists that Pastor John is going to be addressing here today. So let's let him have his say and get into his video.
Melville's Captain Ahab is a study in dangerous obsession, fueled by unmitigated hate. His life's pursuit is to destroy this whale who took his leg. He sees this whale as the embodiment of evil. If he can destroy the whale, he can perhaps regain some meaning to his miserable life. Okay, enough. Why is a Christian pastor discussing Moby Dick? Because I believe many atheists are as obsessed with hatred for God as Ahab was with the white whale.
Comparing atheists to a madman obsessed with vengeance to the point of leading himself, his ship, and his crew to a grisly death? Even the most militant, religion-hating anti-theists would have trouble measuring up to that comparison. And to make it out like Christianity in general, especially certain denominations and their teachings, and specific notable Christians, don't have some animosity coming to them, this is just textbook gaslighting.
And that's gaslighting!
Yeah.
That's gaslighting, mama! Okay? If you're denying our reality, if you're saying that what's happening to us, our lived experience isn't real, that's textbook gaslighting.
It actually is.
Okay.
I don't mean all non-theists. Some skeptics and agnostics are open-minded and seeking answers to life's questions. They're intellectually honest when they say they do not believe there is a God or they haven't been convinced that God exists. I've said the only honest atheist is an agnostic. To declare that God emphatically does not exist is a logical contradiction. The only way anyone could truthfully say that there is no omniscient being in existence would require omniscience.
Well, that is a double-edged sword, John. It cuts both ways. If omniscience would be required to say that there is definitely no such thing as God, then omniscience would also be required to say that there definitely is such a thing as God. And if you would agree with that, if you would say that you don't know definitively that God exists, but that you just believe it, that you have faith in it, then that makes you an agnostic too. You would be an agnostic theist. It's just that the term agnostic is colloquially used as a shorthand to refer to agnostic atheists when in religious discussions. But theists can be agnostic also. But to go a little deeper, you have to differentiate between the overarching concept of a God and specific instances of a God. It may be folly to try to claim with 100% certainty that no God of any kind, of any conception exists, but I think specific God ideas can be definitively known to be false. For instance, if one posits Zeus dwells in a literal, physical palace at the top of Mount Olympus, and then we go to the top of Mount Olympus and there's no palace and no Zeus there, then I think we can conclude with 100% certainty that that God does not exist. And in the same vein, while I do consider myself an agnostic atheist when it comes to the larger concept of God, I do hold that some specific God claims, including the Christian, Bible-derived and described concept of God, definitely does not exist. Because I hold that the concept of God described in the Bible and in the wider faith to be logically impossible for a variety of reasons. Among them, the existence of evil in a world where this God is supposed to be triomni, having all power, knowledge, and benevolent desire to eliminate suffering, and yet doesn't, meaning that he either lacks the power, the knowledge, or the desire to do so, meaning that that could not match the conception of God from Christianity, and thus the Christian conceptualized God doesn't exist. Also, the Christian God supposedly gave humans free will, yet knows everything, including the future, with perfect 100% accuracy, which would mean that the future is predetermined and we would not actually have free will, just the illusion of it. So either this God didn't give us free will and thus doesn't meet the criteria for the Christian God, or isn't all-knowing and doesn't meet the criteria for the Christian God, or, of course, doesn't exist in any form at all. So, yes, you can be an agnostic atheist and still assert with total certainty that specific gods that people believe in don't exist, such as yours.
But the militant angry atheists who troll my DMs and YouTube comments that get held for review by YouTube don't seem to have a problem with every god or every religion. The angry atheist doesn't seem to have a problem with the pantheist who believes that God is everything and everything's God. Likewise, they don't seem to have a problem with polytheism that holds to more than one God. It is the monotheist in general that the angry atheist has a problem with, and the Judeo-Christian God in particular.
Well, John, the pantheists aren't coming for people's reproductive rights under the belief that getting rid of such liberties is what the universe itself wants. The polytheists aren't putting gay children into torturous conversion camps due to a belief that Odin or Kali consider homosexuality an abomination. And it's the Judeo-Christian practitioners specifically who are trying to get their theistic beliefs taught in science classes right alongside established scientific theory so that they can indoctrinate the kids when they're young into the faith. Not to mention that in the Western world, most formerly religious atheists, which comprise a good chunk of the atheist community, came from a Christian denomination, and many deal with trauma associated with that deconversion, as well as trauma from their time within the faith. Former Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, get shunned and ostracized by their families and communities for the rest of their lives. Orthodox Jews aren't allowed to marry outside of their religion, regardless of how deeply they fall in love with someone. And the amount of shaming, persecution, and mental turmoil a person of almost any Judeo-Christian faith faces when coming out as gay, trans, or non-binary is downright criminally abusive in some cases. And when the motivation for such atrocious behavior and downright bigotry can be laid at the feet of the culprit's religious beliefs, then it's no wonder there is some lasting residual anger towards the very religion that threw the victim's life into upheaval. I mean, there is a reason recovering from religion exists and provides counselors available 24/7 to people going through difficulty and outright dangers in leaving their faith.
I believe there are two reasons why it's the God of the Bible that these angry atheists have a problem with. First, many Christians today are pushovers. The backbone of many Christians is made of soft cartilage rather than bone. They'll not stand tall and fight. In many cases, they couldn't if they wanted to for a lack of knowledge. A recent Barna survey showed that only 6% of Christians actually have a worldview.
And here we go, back to the whole Christians are the meek, mild underdog narrative. John, your side are not the weak, non-confrontational, and easily pushed of loudmouth secularists that you position them as. Not only does your side have the aforementioned 88% of the U.S. Congress, but also the entirety of the Supreme Court, with 7 Catholics, 1 Protestant, and 1 Jewish justice. Literally not a single non-Judeo-Christian believer on the highest court in the land. And then when it comes to the executive branch, the President of the United States? But more than just institutionalized power, Christians have all the cultural power in most of the Western world, and certainly in the U.S. There's often no argument or pushback at all when things like the 10 Commandments being displayed in government buildings or courthouses or classrooms, or Christian teachers sermonizing within the classroom of public schools. And anytime any non-Christian does attempt to make a fuss about it, it gets immediate national news coverage so that all the collective might of Christians clear across the country can be brought to bear on the secularist who dared complain until they're harassed back into silence. Let me put it in somewhat biblical terms for you, John. Your side is not tiny little David fighting the good fight against seemingly insurmountable foes. You are Goliath.
Secondly, it's because the God of the Bible convicts them, and they desperately desire for Him not to exist. In a recent video, I quoted 3 famous atheists who readily admitted that they had presuppositions for not wanting God to exist. I don't believe it is only those 3 who have such presuppositions.
I will freely admit I have presuppositions about not wanting the God of the Bible to exist. But it's rather presumptuous of you to claim that it's because God convicts us, hearkening back to that tired old Christian anti-atheist line of, you just want to sin. My presupposition for not wanting God to exist is due to what Greg Koukl calls the exclusivity of Christianity. It's the idea that those who believe in Jesus and declare Him as their Lord and Savior will get to go to heaven, and all others cast into hell. As it says in John 4:16, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now, this is most commonly interpreted, and was certainly what I was taught in my Catholic upbringing, as meaning that everyone has to go through Jesus to get to God, i.e. get to heaven. And that means worshiping and following Jesus is a must. I have a little bit of a problem with the idea that my friends and even family members who are Jewish, Muslim, Hindi, or literally any other religion, or even no religion at all, being condemned to hell for the horrible offense of not being the right religion. And I'll go one further than that. I also have a problem with the idea of anyone, absolutely anyone, anywhere, of any time or place, going to hell, or for any offense, no matter how grievous, being cast into hell for all eternity. If one single human being is in eternal, never-ending anguish, then it is one person too many, and regardless of whatever positives you think having a God would establish, it would pale in comparison to the injustice and outright horror that God is allowed to go on. And yes, I would rather that God not exist at all. And I can see why some atheists who share my line of thinking might get a little miffed with Christians who seem perfectly fine with this supposed state of affairs. That there seems to be a shocking lack of basic empathy when people fully believe that more than 2/3 of all people will burn in hell forever for not being a part of their club.
It's not that you don't believe God exists. You know He does, and it bothers you.
And here we have yet another Christian trope, asserting that atheists don't really exist because everyone knows in their heart that God is really real. We just suppress the truth because we don't want God to exist. Well, for one of those things has nothing to do with the other. I cannot want God to exist, and I can even be bothered by the idea, but if the evidence actually pointed in that direction, I would have to go with that evidence where it led me and conclude that God likely did exist. I mean, what kind of sense does it make to deny God's existence if I really, actually did believe in Him? Wouldn't that just be condemning myself in the process? I mean, who willingly walks into a fire that they can see right in front of them and know to be true, all the while telling themselves that it's not real and they won't really get burned? That makes no sense. No, the evidence against the God of Christianity and the complete lack of evidence for the existence of any particular God concept is sufficient for any critical thinker to come to atheism and genuinely lack a belief in God. And then, if one recognizes that the gods that most people believe in are quite awful anyways, and it's a good thing that they likely or certainly don't exist, well, that's just icing on the cake. Then John gets into a lengthy story about a time in his life when he hated God himself, and the story of what brought him back to worshiping and loving the God that he never stopped believing in. And he seems to be aiming for an "I get you, atheist, because I was just like you once upon a time" angle. Well, for one, no you weren't. If you never doubted the existence of God, regardless of how negatively you may have felt about Him, then you weren't an atheist. And as such, you couldn't understand actually lacking a belief in God. You see, there may be plenty of atheists who have problems with religions, or with that religion's practitioners, or with cultures that promote belief while simultaneously disincentivizing non-belief. There may be anti-theists who hate the existence of any stripe of theism. There may be materialists/naturalists who get frustrated with people who accept the existence of the spiritual as axiomatic that they can't help but scream from time to time. There may be religious trauma survivors who have lingering anger to the point of white-hot rage towards their former congregations and faiths. But no matter the different shades of angry atheists that are out there, there's one unifying aspect of all of them that you are clearly missing, John. None of them, absolutely none, hate God. Because you don't hate what you don't believe in. Oh, sure, as a thought experiment, you could say, I would hate someone fictitious if they were real. I can colloquially say that I hate Saruman, but I pretty much mean that I would hate him were he real. But it's hard to muster up real-world, actual anger towards a fictional character. The anger that you see from atheists are generally aimed at the tangible, real-world results of theism. Churches, congregations, faith leaders, religious cultures, religious politics, and religious behaviors, but not the deities at the center of them, because we don't believe that they exist at all. So that brings us to the end of Jonathan Burris's appeal to angry atheists, and it really contains several of the greatest hits of Christian apologetics. There was the Christian persecution narrative, as well as the narrative of Christians being the soft-bellied underdogs. claims that atheists really do believe in God deep down, but reject him because they just want to sin. Why do you hate Christianity so much and not Islam or polytheism? Said while standing in the center of a country steeped in Christian nationalism and theocracy. And the idea of having been just like us at one time, despite the fact that he never once doubted God's existence, literally the singular criteria for actually being an atheist. But if the goal to any degree on John's part was to understand a little better why some atheists hold animosity for Christianity, I hope I've shed a little light on that. And if you, dear viewer, ever needed a little rhetorical ammo for when any theists you encounter ask the same kind of questions, hopefully you'll find some of the answers I've provided in this video useful. And so that is where we'll end things for today. So thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like this video, comment, and subscribe so you'll always be notified when new videos come out. Till next time, I'm Professor Plink, reminding you to keep striving for greater understanding. It's the best way to get wherever you want to go.